You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies and TV about New Jersey.
Hell yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It's kind of about New Jersey.
Well, it's a movie about New Jersey.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Good job.
Hell yeah.
I'm Jody.
I'm Andrea.
And we just had an amazing conversation that you're about to hear.
With Sav Rodgers.
With Sav Rodgers.
Because we watched Chasing Amy.
Oh my God. It was so good.
It was
I
great.
loved it.
And listeners, you will have not seen Chasing Amy yet unless you followed my directions last week and live in one of the cities where it is currently screening. I love this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we got to have it. I think people are going to love hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're going to love watching Chasing Amy when they can see it even more after hearing this conversation.
Yeah. Sav was an absolute delight. Just such a great conversationalist, such a great sort of mind for thinking about film and documentary, and just a generally cool person.
And so thoughtful and self-aware about this project in particular.
Yeah.
You could tell it really matters to him, but he's also just really very clear-headed about it, I think, in a way that I don't know that I would be if I had made this movie.
Yeah, totally. So for folks who don't know Sav or aren't familiar with him, he's originally from Kansas. He's a filmmaker and screenwriter. This is his featured directorial debut. So we brought this up about 10 months ago when we watched Chasing Amy. And I ended up doing a deep dive in research and found his TED Talk that came out in 2018 about how much this film meant to him as a young queer kid.
We'll link to that TED Talk in the show notes you can watch.
Now he's making his own movies. His screenplays have been recognized by GLAAD, Outfest, Screencraft, among others. He's also the founder and executive director of the Transgender Film Center, and a proud University of Kansas graduate. Wearing a KU baseball cap in a lot of this film. But yeah, we were really lucky to get a chance to talk with him, and he was very generous with his time.
So glad we got to have this conversation with Sav. So excited for people to hear it. Welcome to the podcast, Sav Rodgers.
You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV and movies about how sometimes something that's problematic can still mean a lot in your development. Thank you, Princess Weeks.
I think that's kind of the thesis of this podcast. Accidentally, it's just kind of what it's become.
Exactly.
Jody, I'm so excited.
I can't even. I'm over the moon.
I know. Listeners know that we are very picky about when we ask guests to come on. And also that we've been talking about trying to get this guest in particular on for over a year now.
January.
January?
Was when, yeah. January. Should I explain? Well, let's say who we are and who's here, and then I'll explain. I'm just excited.
I know, me too. You're Jody. I'm Andrea. Sav Rodgers is here.
Hell yeah.
We watched Chasing Amy.
We did.
Hell yeah. It's so funny that you're like, we've been talking about trying to get this guy on since January. Like I'm somebody who's hard to reach.
I know. Okay, that's us. We've been trying to convince ourselves that we can reach out to you.
This will probably be off mic, but what happened was we've been talking about this since Jody found it in research when we covered Chasing Amy last year or earlier this year.
In January, yeah.
And then it turned out that somebody that we know through our other podcast I did some work with you and was like, oh, we'll share, like, I'd be happy to. And then I didn't want to be the one to like use and then I was like, why don't I just reach out to Sav and see what he says? And just totally, but I don't know what I was waiting for. So
no, leave this in, because this is a great, and this ties into Chasing Amy, I would say.
Totally.
Yeah.
Get what you don't ask for.
Exactly.
You're so right.
There were a lot of people at the beginning of this process when I was like, I want to make a documentary about Chasing Amy, that were like, well, you don't know anybody. And I was like, you're right. I don't know anybody. But that is temporary.
Yes.
And I will not place a limit on myself for what the ceiling of this thing can be just because I don't currently know anybody. But generally, like, if you make an ask, like, you'll get an answer, right? And so that was the attitude I had at the beginning of this. So I think it's very funny that you're like, this is this is somebody we've been trying to track down
I know.
for 11
Yeah.
months.
More like finally, Andrea was like, do you think it's okay if we just reach out over Instagram to him? And I was like, yeah. I do.
Yeah. And to be fair, sometimes I don't see stuff on Instagram. So I'll see stuff like, it depends, like certain words are like filtered out that like, I'm like, in case somebody like says something homophobic, I'm like, oh, I don't need to transphobic. Like, I don't need to be party to that. So sometimes I miss stuff in my inbox, but like, there's like an email thing on my Instagram.
It wasn't, once I decided to, it wasn't difficult, but we're so happy to have you here.
Oh my God.
And so Jody and I have been talking a little bit about how to approach this because there's so much in this documentary that we loved so much. And the first thing I want to ask though is, does everybody want to tell you about their relationship to Kevin Smith and Chasing Amy now?
Yes, all the time. Which I kind of signed up for, to be fair. What I did to Kevin and the Chasing Amy gang by being like, here's my very specific relationship with this. Like, I did have a unique pathway in so many ways because of my personal story with it and how I used that to become a filmmaker, right? But these are comments that these people get all the time. But the thing that stood out was that I had a TED Talk, and that was the real difference. And so now when people want to tell me about their Kevin Smith fandom, I'm like, oh, great. Yeah, we have something in common. Love it.
Yeah.
But when people talk to me about this movie, like in any form, like unless they're being like, that sucked, I'm like, okay, well, that's your business. That's really not mine. But
that's so healthy. That's genuinely so healthy of you to be able to do that.
Honestly, like, I think that's been the most challenging part of this whole thing is that, like, oh, now, like, total strangers will have an opinion on me. Like, that's the thing is, like, I keep telling, like, my collaborators on this, like, nothing will ever hurt or feel this intense again because, like, oh, no, somebody didn't like an idea that I had. Oh, no. Like, this is, like, my real life, And so that's the challenging part of when people like hate it or like have something bad to say about it, where it's like it's harder to like separate like okay, did you not like the way that we executed it? Do you just like hate my guts? Like I'm just a guy who likes movies the same as you, I think. And so it is interesting how like a movie doesn't become yours anymore when you release it into the ether. I think, which Chasing Amy also explores. So anyway, all that to say, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I will say, I mean, in relationship to hearing everyone's opinions, I mean, you made yourself very vulnerable in this movie a number of times. Like, and you and Riley both were extremely open with the cameras and with the process. And I did read somewhere that you were hesitant to include yourself in the movie at first at all. And first of all, I'm so glad you did, because it gave, like, I would have watched a movie about someone obsessed with Chasing Amy regardless, just because I'm from New Jersey and I grew up in the 90s. Like, I identify so hard with all of the Kevin Smith stuff, but especially as a queer person, Chasing Amy was like a huge deal to me. But then you went and made it something where I actually cared about the people involved, and that made it so much better. Like, I would have watched it for the pop culture-ness of it anyway, but it became something that meant a lot more because you were in it. So I don't know if you want to maybe say a little bit about how that ended up happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, I'm so relieved that like your perspective on that seems to be like the consensus of like, thank God you were in it,
Well, it helps that you and Riley are both really entertaining and funny people on camera. I laughed out loud a few times.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, there's a whole psychology to all that too. So I'll start from the beginning, which is like, when I initially set out to make a documentary about Chasing Amy, what I wanted to do was kind of explore the relationship between the queer community and Chasing Amy itself as a movie. And it was more like interesting thing of like, hey, I've never met somebody who just had like an okay relationship with Chasing Amy. It's always like, this is the best movie I've ever seen, or this is the worst movie I've ever seen. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting. I think that kind of inherent conflict was an interesting jumping off point. And also my own relationship with it, where it like literally saved my life as a closeted, queer kid in Kansas when I was dealing with a lot of homophobia and transphobia and stuff. Like I thought that that was so interesting. And so I would use my story as a way to convince people, hey, there's a real story here. It happened to me. This is it. And then people be like, is that what the movie's about? And I'd be like, no. And they're like, well, have you considered changing your mind about this at all? And I was like, And then I saw a film called Minding the Gap by Bing Liu, which, if anybody hasn't seen this movie, it's gorgeous. It's wonderful. It was nominated for an Academy Award. One of my favorite documentaries of all time. And the movie is like a meditation on masculinity in Rockford, Illinois, among Bing Liu's like friends he growing up that were skaters. And so Bing includes like and I haven't like watched it recently or like done the math on it, but he's maybe in it 15 minutes talking about his own relationship with his family. And it all ties in this like really beautiful way that's not remotely self-aggrandizing. And so when I saw that, I was like, fine, I will concede to doing this. And that is about as much as I want to be in it. And then when you assemble a team of really smart, brilliant storytellers to work with you, they have their own opinions and they will tell you the truth. And the truth in this scenario was, Sav, we are here for you. And that is not something I wanted to hear. They wanted the film to be about me. And I was like, I would rather do anything than be on camera and be vulnerable in the way that you want me to be.
Yeah.
But after the TED Talk came out, and I gave this 8-minute preview of like basically what the arc of the film would be in so many ways, people were like, dude, you have to be in it. And there's only so much that you can say no to a note from people who you know are there for a reason because they're really fucking smart and good at their job. And so in some ways, I just had to surrender to what the story was telling me, in that the film was about my changing relationship to chasing Amy. And that took like some guts on my end, just because I just didn't want to put myself out there in that way. You know, I wanted to tell the story, not be the story. And then I'm tasked with doing both things. And so there's not a version of me telling my story that does not involve Miss Riley, who is the person I know in any context. You know, whenever I'm like watching like Dropout TV or like these improv people, she's like, I could do that. And I'm like, you should do that.
She could.
You should do that, actually. Like, you're so fucking good at this. And so that is, so that's kind of how it came to be that, you know, like not only like our producers and like our, you know, one of our DPs, Bradley Garrison, who's my best friend, you know, but also our editor, Sharika Ajay Kumar, who is the reason that I think the film works is because she was able to help sift, help me sort all of the crazy feelings I was having watching myself back over and over and over again, and helping us like shape a narrative, but also thread the multiple storylines that we have going at once, right? Where you have the parallels with chasing Amy, so you have the Holden and Alyssa of it all, the Kevin and Joe, all the Guinevere and Scott of it all, and then me and Riley, and only one of the stories works out.
Yes.
And so it was like a maddening process in some ways, because then I had to sort myself from being a filmmaker and being a person, right? There's a filmmaker who's like, yes, against my will, this is the better version of the movie. And the person who's like, if I have to watch myself transition, or if I have to watch this moment that is humiliating to me over and over and over again, like, I'm going to lose my shit. So thankfully we had a great team that helped me sort out the many mental breakdowns I had in post-production on this movie, and who's been so kind and supportive. And like, so as you guys are being so kind to me by, you know, giving me like credit and everything for the movie, but when I say it's a team effort, it's genuinely a team effort. Like, I'm on the screen, I am the director, I am the like lead producer on it, but filmmaking and life are both team sports, and there's no way of getting without a great team.
No, I totally this is not my job. I teach photography at a university, and so I'm familiar with the role of a good editor, and how much that can change an entire story. I literally teach lessons on it. So I do think that editor that you mentioned did an amazing job of threading it together, because you can see the moment in the middle with the Joey interview where everything in your mind suddenly shifts. And that could have interrupted the movie in a way that really broke it up in a negative way. But instead, because of the editing and because of the fact that you were willing to go back, it does actually, it turns the movie into, I think, what it was supposed to be. So
Yeah. I mean, and in that, so for context, so we had gone through two or three editors by the time we got to Sharika. Both of whom were like very talented, but like our first one was Anthony Padoni, who has this film right now that was previously called Walden, that's now called Unlikely Allies, about like cannabis, the pardoning of like cannabis for this specific guy named Angelos Weldon. And so basically Anthony was our initial pick for being an editor on it. And then just like life stuff happens and, you know, you got to move on and all of that. So I love Anthony. He's an EP on the movie. He's great. And then we went to Bradley Garrison, one of our DPs, who did not want to edit this movie, but was like our stayover like editor while we were trying to figure out like a more permanent solution. And so then Sharika came to us through Space Station, our post-production company. And she was just brilliant. And so when she got the cut, she was kind of thrown into this, being like, hey, you need to make something of this. And I was so nervous because I thought that this was like her 18th like doc feature, and I was like a documentarian that was like, I'm in it and I kind of don't know how to feel about it, and I'm very stressed for not to watch footage at this point because I've seen it so much.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh my God, this is this guy's real life story, and I am tasked with the responsibility of this. So we were both like extremely nervous, but like weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
So Sharika though, like I told her, I was like, we need to start with the Joey interview. The entire movie has to build to this point. And so and eventually we got to this like mandate that I had put out that was like every scene has to be about my changing relationship to chasing Amy.
Yeah.
But we started with that Joey interview because we knew before you get to that point, you need to see the whole journey for why when we do this interview, it has the impact not just on me, but like in like the grand sense of the story.
Totally.
And so how that changes everything that's happened since then.
Yeah.
And so everything in the movie is building up to that Joey interview, so that you're getting to know me, and so that when you are in the seat with me interviewing Joey, like that's what it's supposed to feel like, is that you were like there with me. And when you get to that point, it has to have the impact of like, okay, this is going to shift your entire mindset. It's not, you know, it's an emotional beat that you have to honor. And so everything in the movie builds up to that point, and everything in the movie leading up to that point is preparing you for how it's going to feel sitting in my director's seat there. And I love that Sharika just got it. And from there, we were able to just build that narrative together. And she's so fucking brilliant. She should be editing every good documentary that comes out. And like, if there was any justice in the world, I think like she would have like her next 10 docs lined up, and it would be hard for me to like get her for the next one.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to let Andrea talk, I promise. I do this to her sometimes when I get excited. I just want to say that moment, like we do feel it. Like when Joey starts talking about her perspective and literally says to you, like, I don't know what you want from me, my stomach dropped. I was just like, oh no, what's happening? And it is such a pivotal point. You can really feel like what it would be like to be confronted with that whole switch.
No, I mean, it's just that question, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
And you can see that I'm totally caught off guard because I'm like, well, I'm trying to interview you. And she's like, what do you want from me? And I'm like in an existential way, like
right.
People ask me all the time, what did it feel like in that moment? I'm like, well, you can see it on my face. Like the whole point is for you to feel all of the things I'm feeling in that moment. Yeah. And she's not wrong about anything, by the way. You know, it is a moment, it is a gift to have the ability to reflect, right? It is a gift for somebody whose work you admire to kind of give you feedback, right? And so I'm forever grateful for that moment with Joey, because it took, you know, I got to go through the motions and the experience of being in Kevin Smith land for a bit. And Kevin Smith land is a fun place to be, but it's not reality for anybody but Kevin.
Right. Yeah.
I was a guest in that space for a limited time to try to tell the story that I was telling.
Yeah.
And then I am, for context, like my mom grew up in the same town as Joey. Joey was like 3 years older than her.
Oh my
They
God.
probably have friends in common. I've never talked to Joey about this, but
Whoa.
like it's very, she's from where my family's from,
Huh.
like her sensibility is very salt of the earth, as Bob Hawke describes.
Yeah.
And so for her to bring me back to reality in that way of like, because she's posing a lot more questions than just what do you want from me when she's
Mhm.
asking that. She's
Absolutely.
like, what are you doing? What do you
Mhm.
want? Who do you want to be? Is this what you want to be doing?
Right.
There's a lot of questions underneath that.
Yeah.
So again, like that's not a moment I particularly enjoy watching back, but I also know that it is a gift that keeps on giving to have that existential question of like, what do you want?
Mhm.
And so forever grateful to Joey for that.
Yeah.
It's really remarkable, and I have 12 questions I want to ask you now, all related to that. And so,
Let's go.
so the first thing is it's so incredible too because it's a really beautiful moment for her. I think that she gets to tell this part of the story from her point of view. It gets like 10 or 12 minutes, I think, in the film, this interview, which is a hefty chunk of, and how long is this, 90 some minutes, that she really gets her
Yeah.
story centered. And it's triply complicated because, as Kevin says, and as you talk about, Alyssa is in large part based on Joey, and everybody knows that. So, somebody who's seen Chasing Amy, like the three of us here, a million times, like I have an idea of what it probably was like for her, right? Like going into this, and it gets totally, at least partially flipped. And so I think that's not a question. I just think it's really incredible that happened, and it wasn't something you set out to do.
Interestingly enough, it also made, so for me, I'm in my late 40s. I'm in my late 40s, and I grew up as a queer kid, weirdly like you, with no pop culture that spoke to me at all. And like there were other movies. Your line of like, to be fair, I didn't know there were other gay movies. Like, I didn't either. And there were less of them when I was growing up, but they were out there. But the only culture I had access to was mainstream culture because I didn't have any queer friends. So it had that same effect on me. But then with the Joey, just to come back to the Joey thing, what that did was it weirdly connected. I'm coming off as like the weirdest fan, but it connected me even more to the movie because not only did I grow up as a queer kid, I grew up as a woman in the 90s that has had the same experiences, not in entertainment, but everywhere else that Joey described in that interview. And I was like, the fact that you sat with that and allowed her to have that moment, it makes the movie speak to even more people than it would have otherwise in an interesting way.
Well, thank you. Again, we wanted her to be able, I mean, that interview went on for hours. So what was hard about it was making sure that we tried to represent everything that she was saying in that interview as fully and as fairly as possible. I mean, there is an awesome responsibility when somebody chooses to share their story, their truth, their experience with you. And that's something that I don't think I was prepared for at the beginning of this process because I didn't expect that I guess I didn't expect that any truths like that would come out. I was hoping for it, but it's one thing to know that something could happen. It's another thing when it does happen, right? It's one thing to like know a thing cerebrally, I guess. And it's another thing to have experienced it and to live with the weight of that in some ways. And so Joey didn't have to share any of that. It's clearly all a surprise to me in the interview. And so I'm very thankful that she shared all of that. But also, like, once we knew that we had this, we're like, okay, the whole movie's different now. The whole movie is different now because it's not just like that is specifically her experience, but that experience is unfortunately quite universal for virtually every woman on the planet in some way, the ways that women are marginalized, as you just explained, the topic of, sexual harassment is unfortunately something that we still really need to talk about in the world, let alone in entertainment. We knew at the outset we would have to talk about Harvey Weinstein, you know, but the other insidious ways in which that heinous man operated in the business, you know, were also talked about in this documentary. And so, you know, you're very kind to give me credit, but also it's like, well, Joey really laid out what needs to be prioritized there. And it's our responsibility as filmmakers to listen. So all credit to her for that.
I want to pull back just a tiny bit just to kind of give you some context, because I know our listeners are probably hearing this too and thinking about, we've done a little run of documentaries. So this is the third one we've covered in 3 weeks. And we did Tommy Avallone's The House From. And we did, he was on a few weeks ago. It's really lovely, I
haven't had a chance to see it yet, but I really like him and I'm excited to watch it.
He's great, and it's really fun and sweet, and he talked a lot about that one being one. He's like, I kind of looked at it like National Geographic, like we just kind of put cameras in front of the things because that's what people wanted to see, and he's in it for like 30 seconds, and then last week we covered Kim's video, and I don't have you have you seen it?
No, not yet, but it was another Tribeca premiere, I think. Maybe
I think that's right.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it at least played at Tribeca the year we premiered, but I've never seen less movies in the last 2 years.
That's fair.
It's really horrible, actually. Like I'm excited to stop promoting this just so I can go back into my hidey hole and catch up on movies.
I totally get that. And I won't get in. I talked a lot about it. I think it's really interesting. There's some complicated stuff that held up against your documentary. I think is really interesting because I kept saying last week, letting a story tell itself the way it feels like it's asking to be told in a way. I think that movie struggles with a little bit is what I'll say. And it doesn't feel that way with your story, even when there is tension with you and the story that you are telling. It feels really, I don't know what the word that I want is, but natural in a way that I think I'm sure has way more to do with the work done in the edit, like you were saying. And that, let me think for a second about how I want to word this question. This is why Jody will, why I often let her run the show.
I'm from the loud part of New Jersey, so
I'm from the part with the corn and tomatoes.
She's from the South.
Yeah.
I might have some insight into, I think, what you're responding to.
Please.
So I had a rule in post that there would be no unearned sentimentality. There would not be a moment that did not pass my severe litmus test for, do I think that this moment works emotionally? I think sometimes, and I won't name the documentaries that do this, but trust me, I had a lot of references for what not to do when we were going through post that I was like, absolutely not. And sometimes there would be a moment that other people would find cute and would find its way into the edit for my consideration or as a sample. And I'd be like, no, this doesn't pass my litmus test. And audiences are really smart. Audiences are really smart when they're trying to engage with a film, especially one like this. Like, this is not like a baby food type movie. Like, this is a movie that is talking about emotions and feelings and, pop culture and its history. And there's so many elements to it that I think weed out people who would not want to watch it. Right. And so I knew that the audience for this movie would be really smart. And I'm going to be like, they're going to smell bullshit a mile away. So we're not including anything that does not specifically adhere to the mandate of, it has to be about my evolving relationship to chasing Amy. But even if we think something's cute because you know me, I'm like, that doesn't mean they're going to care about it, right? And so that was something that was really, really important to us. And so it had to fit that evolving narrative of my changing relationship to chasing Amy. But it also, there was a no bullshit policy because I'm like, nobody's going to be harder on me than myself because I'm not going to find out in public that all of you lied to me about this moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not going to be egg on my face because you love me. And for the most part, we didn't have a problem with that. But there were some moments in the ways that things were cut, initially, where I was like, hey, so this like this doesn't feel reflective of like how this actually happened.
Mm.
And there's a way that you can read into this moment that just totally is not based in reality and also makes like everybody in this scene look like an asshole. And so like there were moments like that where I would be like really like sometimes I would like take people's word for it of like, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I think, and then they would show it to a person and they'd be like, this is a weird moment. I'd be like, I fucking knew it, you know, like
Yeah.
like it's really like a no bullshit policy because like audiences are smart. They can see when you're trying to like sell them on something. And this is a documentary that in some ways is like pure emotion. And so you can't force that. Everything has to be earned. And so we wanted to make sure that if we were going to highlight something that you could really understand my perspective, but also the perspectives of anybody else going in there. So somebody's like pouring their heart out. You need to give space to that moment because also an audience is imposing their own experiences as we've talked about today, our experiences of our participants, you know, whether that's Princess Weeks talking about Chasing Amy being quote unquote accidentally good at like bisexual representation, or something as heavy as Guinevere talking about her experience at Sundance, right? And the release of Go Fish. That's all very important for us to give space to and honor.
Yeah. Speaking of Guinevere, I've been in love with her since she was on stage in Chasing Amy, and I'm just more so now after watching your film. Oh my God, that woman. Anyway, that's a side note, but just had to express, because I texted Andrea a bunch of times about how hot she was then and how hot she still is.
It's also, everybody is so good on camera in this documentary, and you couldn't really have known that until, right? I mean, I know a lot of them are actors, but I mean, talking about their experiences and themselves and their relationship with this in ways that feel really honest, but also like kind to Kevin and the movie. And
I think like a lot of people felt more comfortable on camera because the interview style was like conversational. It wasn't that I was hidden behind like a monitor in Video Village and I was like, all right, tell us your feelings, like, you know, from a distance. It was like a thing where I could like instantly build rapport with people because one, I sent them the TED Talk. Anytime I asked somebody to do an interview, I was like, hey, here's where I'm coming from this. You don't have to be 100% aligned with me or remotely aligned with me, but I think you'd be an interesting person to talk about this too. Yeah. And what happened, we interviewed a lot more people than ended up in the final movie. But, you know, the people who really popped on screen, I think, were the people who were incredibly telegenic. But they were able to be telegenic in a way that was authentic and not like trying to sell you something.
Totally.
And so nobody's like trying to like sell their perspective on Chasing Amy, but they are really engaging in an authentic dialogue where I'm like, this is fucking awesome because we had people who hated the movie and people who loved the movie and they could talk about all their viewpoints and they were just really persuasive where it's like, yeah, there is room for these things to exist at once. And like Princess Weeks is one of my favorite. Like you quoted her at the
so good.
So good. And you can actually see like, you know, you're especially in the beginning, like your nervousness when interviewing Kevin. And then you get in a room with someone like Princess and all of a sudden it's just like, you know, two people hanging out and just talking about this stuff like we all do. And it just felt so comfortable and natural, like you guys had been in the same friend group forever. Like there's definitely a vibe that shifts when you're talking to someone from the community that's like reflecting on this. It just feels like it feels more comfortable, I guess.
Totally. I'm not somebody who is starstruck easily. And yet there are just some things when I was talking to Kevin that I couldn't get around, you know, some things when I was talking to Joey that I couldn't get around. Because I had spent so much more time with them through their work than they ever will with me. These are people I met, you know, a couple of years ago that I spent a handful of hours with interviewing. And for the most part, that's the extent of my rapport with most of the people who worked on Chasing Amy, as kind as they've been to me, you know, you know, even who I've spent more time with, you know, they're in some ways, it's like, there's just an imbalance there that like no matter how prepared you are as an interviewer, where it's like, well, I can't really change what this meant to me. Like, I can't come in like I'm, you know, fucking NBC or something. I can't come in like give me, you know, I can just come in as myself. And it was really great to be able to establish rapport with people who, are more of my contemporaries in some ways than, people who have been doing this for longer than I've been alive, and like that's the difference.
Yeah. Andrea and I recently went to Vulgarthon, Kevin Smith's whole, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where he did all of the Jay and Silent Bob movies. And I think of myself as someone who's not impressed with stardom. And I hovered near him in the hallway awkwardly until he saw me and was like, "Do you want to get a photo?" I was like, "Yeah." Like,
he's good at that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it doesn't matter how cool you think you are. If you've been watching someone's work for 25, 30 years, you can't escape it.
It's really wild to me. I will see, and I think Kevin is genuinely the most charming man in show business. Because I have seen like A-list people fall all over themselves around him in a way that, like, look, I recognize I made this movie, but I'm like kind of,
but that's a little
like,
far.
I'm just like, these are people with like the power to get projects like greenlit like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People whose star power is like very big, and like when they see him, they just like fall all over themselves in a way where I'm like, okay, like I get me doing it, but like, these are people that work in his movies and they still feel that like that feeling. And I'm like, there's a certain magnetic quality to Kevin that I can never really blame people for feeling it, and I've certainly been in that magnetic pull. And it's because he has this genuine charisma that makes you want him to like you. You want people want him to see them as they are, because like it gives them something, because like Clerks influenced them or made them want to be in movies. Like it's always surprising to me, but never shocking, I guess.
Yeah.
He's so, I don't want this interview to just be about Kevin Smith, obviously, but he's so good at that too. That's one of the things at Vulgarthon, where after every movie he did a Q&A, and I am a little like I get very anxious during Q&As because of just a variety of reasons. I'm sure you've had to answer plenty of questions but he's so good at least seeming very like thankful and genuinely interested in questions that I'm like, he's had to have answered the hockey jersey question 100 times by now. But he
Even
always
when someone has a comment, not a question.
Jody. And so I think that's actually something, as I'm saying it, I'm like, I am nobody, and I should take that kind of like that as a lesson of just being like open and thankful for that kind of connection with people. It's really nice to see.
Yeah.
Well, I will say you're not nobody. Don't say that. Don't manifest that shit. Nobody.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't say that about yourself. But that is a genuine skill in this business. Like going on a talk show and being very interesting to talk to is a really difficult skill. It's kind of like auditioning in that it's a skill that's a very specific, that you can only train for by like doing it. There's no like preparation for being a good auditioner except having like worked on your craft, and then you show up and you know what the kind of the unwritten rules of the room are.
Yeah.
So I would say the same things are applicable for both like talk shows, even doing like podcasts and whatnot, and Q&As, because and this is something that Riley has said to me before that like makes me feel very good about myself. That she's like, you get asked the same questions over and over and over again, and you answer them like it's the first time you've ever said it. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's not their fault. They weren't there in Utah, and, this date when I answered this question. And so it's like, you have to find pathways into being genuinely grateful to be asked a question. Because I remember when nobody gave a shit about anything I made, and it was like pulling teeth at like, on a crowded stage with other shorts filmmakers, and nobody had a question for me, or, it'd be like, the only question you get is like, what are you working on next? Or what's your film about? Or why did you? And it's like, oh, people are actually interested in engaging with the work. And I will say, like, from everything I've observed with Kevin, on camera, off camera, I think he is genuinely grateful that people show up to his movies. They ask him questions.
That's cool.
and he has no problem launching into a monologue he's done.
No, he does not.
and it's fun for him, like
Yeah.
every time. And I think that is something that I think we can all learn from as creative people and just like human beings of like, oh man, somebody like is taking an interest in talking to you. Don't be an asshole about it.
Yeah.
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 I have a question that's kind of shifting here, but I'm wondering, when do you remember when you realized that not everybody loves Chasing Amy? Because I have that memory about that, and Jody and I, with this podcast, I keep having that experience over and over again. I'm like, Empire Records was a flop. Like, that movie means everything to me. I had no idea.
Yeah, I do remember this moment very clearly, actually. I think it was a sophomore in college, and I was in this like queer studies class, and I had this professor named Aster Gilbert. And it's sick. It's a great name. And I remember she worked at the intersection of, like women, gender, and sexuality studies and film, but it wasn't a film class. So something came up about like favorite movies, and she just kind of gave me this look like, huh. And
oh, no.
and I was like, huh. And she's like a film programmer. I generally think she has like great taste. But I was like, that's the first time that everyone's ever made me feel kind of bad about liking Chasing Amy.
Yeah.
And then from there, that's where I learned that it had a controversial, complex reputation among queer people. None of which I fault any. I don't care if somebody's reaction to Chasing Amy is like, it's not for me. I think it's bad for X, Y, Z reasons. And I try to give plenty of space to that in the movie. But it was the first time that I was like, huh, there's something here. We'll investigate later.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like a lot of those people may have come to that movie with more either self-knowledge or film knowledge maybe than I did. Like, because I had neither of those things when I saw Chasing Amy. I don't think I think I knew I was queer, but I don't think that I had admitted it to myself really. And I also had never seen like a depiction of a bisexual, I mean, she doesn't call herself bisexual, but Princess Weeks can talk about that. But the fact that like she's fluid and she's cool and she's like the object of everyone's like affection, it just, I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I do think there is something to in Chasing Amy, the idea that because she's queer doesn't mean she's not desirable. And I totally understand the perspective of like, oh, this is like a straight man's fetish. But just in the approach, I just never felt that way because the movie's about insecurity. It's about love and loss in relationships. It's not like that speech in the car, I think, kind of divorces the notion that like he's there for like a fetish because he's trying to turn a lesbian. It's like, you see they have a genuine friendship and you see, that there is something there. And like Guinevere says, that's the I love you speech that anybody would want to hear on the receiving end. And so, I mean, I thought it was cool. And between Alyssa's character and Hooper, I was like,
oh my God.
I know.
Hooper showed up at Vulgarthon.
And I cried.
Mustafa is fucking awesome.
Best.
He is fucking awesome. And he had declined to be interviewed for Chasing Amy, which, I was like, okay, that's totally fine. Right. But what I was surprised and delighted by is that we had like built like a little bit of like an online friendship as we were like, he was very supportive of the movie. He was very excited to see it. And I invited him to our premiere at Tribeca. And the first time I met him was on the red carpet at Tribeca. And so there are all these photos of us like for the first time.
So cool.
And we got to like, he stood up at like the premiere. We shouted him out at the premiere of like, hey, go talk to this guy in the lobby because, this guy, fucking rules. And he's just always been such a kind, genuine dude that like, I'm really glad that, he's kind of entering the public sphere again on his own terms. And he's such a kick-ass actor that I'm like, I'm dying to work with him as an actor and I'm dying to work with him just period. He's just a lovely man.
People lost their minds when he walked into the theater.
Yeah.
Like lost their minds. It was so
and
nice
he
to see him.
That love.
He does. Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's very cool.
Yeah. As a photographer, there were so many ways that you were framing shots and the colors of the backgrounds and the way they worked with the people's clothing and their hair. Like, this doesn't need to make the podcast. I just visually really enjoyed the way you set up the interviews.
Yeah, we'll cut out this compliment.
Okay, no, I
Sav,
don't know if anyone else is interested in it. Like,
no, I think it's totally. I never get asked about this because people want to ask me about my feelings because nobody's ever. There are few men on the planet that have ever enjoyed talking about feelings as much as I do. So like, it's
Kevin Smith,
fine.
maybe.
Yeah,
he might be the other one.
So,
yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of dudes on this project that we love talking about feelings. But
I've never related harder to when you were trying to get the necklace right. I was just like, it has to be. I was like, this is speaking my language. Yeah,
I am thankful that somebody is on my side about the necklace.
100%. It could not be too far over. It would have been distracting the whole time.
It was super. Anyway, yes.
No, I'm with you. And if it was right lined up on the seam on her shirt, that would have also been weird.
Yeah, she likes to bully me when there are people around. She bullies me in private too. But look, it made for a cute on camera moment. But I'm like, I'm being gaslit because this does not look correct. Anyway, no, I mean, but the composition was like all very intentional. I mean, Kevin was going through a phase where he was wearing like purple a lot. So I was like, I'm hoping you wear the purple blazer for this. I think he still wears the purple blazer a lot, but I thought the yellow was gonna pop really well. Yeah. Full credit to our DPs, Bill Winters and Bradley Garrison, for helping establish that look that we could carry out throughout the film.
Yeah.
But then also we had this look for all of the interviews, and so by the time you get to my final interview, we're divorcing ourselves actually from that aesthetic. Totally.
Don't think I did not notice. I noticed when all of a sudden it's you on a black background with the caption. I was like, he flipped it. Yeah. I saw it.
Yep. You're seeing the visual journey.
I loved it.
It's much less talked about, but like everybody was like, a talking head documentary. Oh no. And I'm like, just because there's a talking head element to the documentary doesn't mean that it has to be heinous to look at. Right, like, let's get a grip, people. Yeah. Like people were always like afraid of that when we were talking about like sales and stuff. And I'm like, you can't tell me that there aren't interesting talking head documentaries. Like, so I'm very thankful to Bill, who was like the first DP who helped like establish like that backdrop look. But also there was a DP I talked to ahead of time prior to it, who I was in talks with to shoot it, named Tyler Clark. And Tyler presented this idea to me of considering like having like a paper backdrop to kind of like visually tie in the stuff together, because I was like nervous. I was like, I don't want it to just look like we're in people's houses all the time. Yeah. But presenting that idea kind of allowed me to like articulate this idea of like, oh, we're going to see the artifice of documentary filmmaking as we're making this. Yeah. Because you have to, because like once I had agreed to be in it, I knew that there was going to be an element to it of, well, this is all pretend in some ways. Like the story is real, but we're here with 3 cameras, right? That's the thing that Joey calls out. We're here with 3 cameras. We're here with this, you see where the backdrop falls off and you start to see in those B angles something very intentional.
So I wanted to,
thank you. Like that shot of Kevin, that's like the B angle where you see the backdrop and then you just see that we're in his house. Mm-hmm. Like that was very important to me. And you see like the depth of field, like behind me when we're shooting, my angle on it, because, it's made up. Like I'm there with 3 cameras. Ask a bunch of questions about a movie that was made 25 years ago at the time. And so that is the purpose of it. So I'm glad that the visuals worked for you. Brad and Bill and our whole team, made sure, they worked their asses off to get everything perfect. God bless, Kevin and Jennifer for letting us load in so much fucking gear into their house to make the camera setup work. I don't think that's what they had in mind when we said that we needed to like set up. Like Kevin's been interviewed for a lot of documentaries and usually people just come with a camera, but I've always been like a scripted filmmaker first, which is weird because like this is like the thing I'm known for is the stock now. But it's like you want to the shots have meaning, and so I'm geeking out because it's the first time I've gotten to like really talk about this.
I could talk about this the whole time. I was
just gonna say, I feel like
Andrea probably would kill me, but
I come from not visual, but I was an English teacher and a writing teacher, so story is so important to me, and I think that I think a lot of people feel like documentaries are just like I show up with a camera and then you see what we, you know what I mean? Like what we shot. And it's all as if there isn't so much thought and craft that goes into it. And I think it's so cool that you get to see that here in a story that is about becoming and creating and how what we kind of love shapes who we are. And then you're shaping, like it's all kind of like tangled up together in this documentary in a really beautiful way.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. Have you two seen Will and Harper yet by any chance?
Not yet.
That's on our list.
It's
Yeah, it's on our list.
So I love the movie. For context, Josh Greenbaum, a beautiful gem of a man. I got to meet him through Will and Harper, and Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar is like in my top 5 movies of all time. Like it's just the best. But all I could think about at some point, like after watching Will and Harper, besides like it was a very moving movie emotionally, like that's a movie that I fucking love. It's one of my favorites of the year. But all I could think about was like, oh my God, like they had to like rig stuff to like the car hood while driving.
Yeah.
I was like, how long did it take? Like, I have so many technical questions for Josh that, like, I'm sure he'd be happy to like answer, but I'm also just like, like, that's so stressful. Like, I felt stressed, like bringing 3 cameras into somebody's house. You're doing a road trip across the country. How many vans with production equipment are with you? You have this picture cart. Like, there's so many things. So even like when you're capturing this like real stuff, there's always an artifice to it that like people are like, well, why does it look like? And it's like, well, you're limited in documentary in so many ways because, you can't spend, millions of dollars on like a day or whatever. But it's also like you're trying to capture reality, but you have to figure out what is the most compelling way to capture reality in a way that suits the story that you're telling. So some people are just like, it's easy. You shoot with your iPhone. It's like, no. God, no.
Well, and what those backdrops did for me was like, because they were different colors for each person, it kept it like different enough that I would be constantly being like, oh, cool, new person. What are we going to hear from them? But then the lighting, shout out to whoever did the lighting, was so consistent and so beautiful in all of them that it also felt cohesive, even though it gave variety. So
yeah. I mean, and just for any like filmmakers who could be listening, like we had like a diagram of like, what is our standard chasing Amy setup? We put this light here, we put this light here. We tried to stay consistent as possible with like which lights we were using where. So that
it's hard in people's houses and interiors.
Oh my God.
It's hard.
Let me tell you.
I've done portrait projects in people's homes. It is not easy.
So we had a location fall through on a week I was going to be in LA and we were shooting a ton of Talking Head interviews. And shout out to Sheila Garrison, Bradley Garrison's mom, who let us shoot in her house for 3 days. Like the God. Scott Mosier interview was in there. Eric Moore's interview was it. Like there were so many people. But like the downside is that we were right next to we're right next to LAX.
Oh,
and planes, sometimes every 2 minutes. And we're just like, I'm so sorry, Scott. Like, could you start your answer over again about how you were in romantic friendship with Guinevere Turner? Like some of the personal things you've ever talked about in public?
Yeah.
Like, oh my, like all of our people were so understanding, but like
we had so funny.
So there are so many logistics there. But yeah, the fact that we were able to light consistently in like Sheila Garrison's house, in the studio where like the Beastie Boys used to record and like there's no air conditioning. Like,
oh God.
Bless every single person who decided to do this. I'm not religious. I keep saying bless these people, but like, thank goodness for these people who were so patient and kind and like agreed to be in this and like gave their real perspectives on shit that like they probably thought they would never be asked about.
Yeah.
And yet they were so game and they were, we were able to feed off each other's like enthusiastic energy and our crew that was able to like put together all of these like productions, like in Guinevere Turner's house, in Kevin's house, in Joey's house, and all of the people who agreed to like do this because they did not have to. Nobody had their arm twisted being like, you have to be here. Although I will say, if you want a fun little anecdote about how Jason Lee got in the movie, It's 4/20/2022. Kevin has a show with Jason Lee reading a portion of like Twilight of the Mallrats. So Kevin's like, hey, we're going to get Jason Lee on this day. And so I'm like, great, I'll be in LA that day. I have 3 days to pull a whole shoot together. We get there. We're in the location where he's doing the show. We have this like rooftop where we're doing this. And I go up to Kevin when he gets there. And I'm like looking, and Jason Lee's kind of like walks by us and he's like, oh, cool. And I go to Kevin. I'm like, does he know he's about to do an interview with us? He's like, no. 15 minutes before Jason goes on stage, Kevin says, hey, you're going to do this interview for this documentary. And I was like, and I was like, oh my God. So I'm pacing around for 90 minutes being like, oh no, he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what we're going to ask him. I have no rapport with this man. Thank goodness. Jason was a very good sport about it. He gets off stage, he does it. He has no idea what the premise of the documentary is. He has not seen the TED Talk. I do not have the rapport that I was
stressing me out for you.
I know. And it's a movie where he just says the F word the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I can only imagine how it might have felt from his perspective.
Yeah.
Because I go in there and I'm like, so here's some like questions about the gay reception, and he's like, what? And I'm like, I'm trying everything to be like, no, this isn't a gotcha thing. Like, I love Chasing Amy. It saved my, I am like, but like, I have to ask you these questions. So after like 20 minutes, he's like freezing on this roof. That's why he's like sitting like this the whole time. And I'm just like, and I'm like, all right, we're going to put him out of his misery. Like, here we go. And so he was very nice. He signed the waiver. Like, he very cool. Years later, in April of 2024, actually, we played at the Cleveland Film Festival. We won 2 awards. It was fucking awesome. I'm like in the airport with Riley, and I see Jason Lee because he's there for a convention. He's there for some big convention. I just saw all the hobbits from Lord of the Rings in the airport. It was very fun. It was very fun day at the Cleveland airport.
Yeah.
And so he's like going into the store, and I'm like trying to walk up to him, but I think he thinks I'm like just like some fan.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to, and so like I chase him down. I'm like, hey man, like not chase him, but like I walk up to him like, hey Jason, you don't remember me. Like 2 years ago, you gave me 20 minutes of your time for a documentary about Chasing Amy. He's like, oh yeah, like. And I'm just like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for being in it. We just won 2 awards at this film festival. He's like,
cool.
oh, and I'm like, yeah, it's like, it's out. But like, so probably the 2 times I have met Jason Lee, he's like, oh my God, who the fuck is this man? But I am thankful to you, Jason Lee, for agreeing to be in the film, even if you didn't know you were going to be in this fucking thing. So very nice man. We talked about Wim Wenders. He's got great taste in movies. And now he runs like a photography shop in Eagle Rock, which is fun. And he also narrated the House From for Tommy.
Yes,
so,
he did.
It's good to see him doing that, but I don't think I've ever told that story in
That's
public
so funny.
either.
That's so funny.
It was also nice to hear, you know, the 90s and the Kevin Smith universe was a very bro culture. It was a different kind of bro culture, but it was very much a bro culture. And to hear that he actually had some hesitation about the language in that movie at the time was actually kind of refreshing and was nice to know, because that's the hardest part for me about rewatching it. It's like, because the stuff that's not true to the queer community, I'm like, whatever, it's Kevin Smith. He didn't know.
Right.
Like, I don't expect him to actually know. But all the language is really hard to kind of deal with when you watch it, if you've ever had those words hurled at you. And like that, it was nice to know that Jason Lee wasn't just like happily shouting the F word all the time. Like,
totally. I mean, and that's a big reason that people don't like Chasing Amy, is like the use of slurs. And I'm like, you'd be hard pressed to watch any film from prior to 2000 that doesn't kind of liberally use that word when talking about queer people.
100%.
Or involving queer people. And I do like the reclamation from a lot of queer people of like, these are our slurs, we're going to use them more casually now. Like I actually appreciate that, which is not a sentiment that I held as a kid, as somebody who had just had those violently used against me. But with some time and perspective and healing, I'm like, yeah, these are fucking words, and you're gonna hear them. Also, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear podcast, but you're gonna have to bleep me out.
This is up 2 people from Jersey.
2 people from New Jersey.
No, you're in good company.
I love New Jersey, by the way. It was so easy to film in New Jersey. I gotta say,
Oh,
That's
I'm
cool.
really, I'm not blowing smoke here. Like every time I go to Jersey, it's like a very pleasant experience.
even if
In
you
a
are,
way,
I don't care. You can
Yeah,
keep blowing
it's
smoke. I
totally
don't.
fine.
no,
Neither of us currently live there, and we have a podcast that's entirely based on. I know. You can cut it out. You're doing the
I'm
editing.
kidding. I'm kidding. It's a joke. I live in Philly, though. I'm so close to Jersey, but yeah.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, you're a hop, skip, and a jump away, I hear.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna film my next like film in Jersey
Hell
because
yeah.
it's been such like a pleasant experience working there. Like anytime I'm there, I'm like, oh yeah, like it's very chill. Like all of the
That's
locations where like Chasing Amy was shot, they were game to let us shoot in there again.
that's
Oh
cool.
my
And that was just
god.
like such a fun thing, you know?
That montage when you were like, I think I want to get the music, and oh my god, that was the first time I
It's,
almost cried because I
I
was like,
know.
it's just such a that music does it for me too. But yeah.
Well, it was so nice because it's like one of the only films that we or music that we license in the film is
Mhm.
that song. And I think the songwriter's name is Brian. And he like when it played in like Minnesota, like where he is, he like did like a little like thing on Instagram talking about like, you know, how much he loved the movie and that you could hear the
Cool.
song in the movie and everything. And
Oh
he was like just so kind about it. And I was like, this fucking rocks. Like this is all I ever wanted was like
yeah.
to to have work that was recognized by the people who like helped shape my perspective in some
Yeah.
ways. And it is the perfect like montage rom-com song.
It is.
Yeah.
So I was really happy we were able to work that out for the film because music is very expensive and very hard to license.
Yes.
I love that scene, that montage so much because actually I think it's a little later. But either way, when you're at Quick Stop, it's all related. And the fact that you're able to be sort of like sentimental but without being too precious, where you're just like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's so healthy to be able to be like, this is a thing that really mattered to me. And then you spent how many years working on this documentary, but then to be able to be like, and now you're talking to us about it again. Like, but then to be able to be like, it's a part of me, sure, but also like,
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, these places and cinema in general, it only has as much meaning as we ascribe to it.
mhm,
And so the reason even that this conversation is fun is because you got something out of the movie that now gives me more energy when talking about it of like, oh, I feel like this is a really friendly environment. These are two people that I think really understood the story that we were trying to tell.
mhm,
And it makes that even better because there's certainly days and weeks and sometimes months where I, you know, have like incredible periods of self-doubt where I'm
mhm.
like, what did we do this for? You know, what did
Yeah.
I, you know, I traded 6 years of my life, you know, to release into this market, you know, or you know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
like things
Yeah.
feel really bad.
Yeah.
It's like, you
You
know,
gave me the
you can,
first yeah. You gave me the
oh
first
no,
genuine smile that I'd had in 48 hours
100%.
when I watched this. Because
Yeah.
I watched it Thursday night and I had
Same.
not smiled in 2 days. And I literally said to Andrea over text, I was like, I need this right now. I'm going to watch it. And I, from the very first moment, was just like, oh, right. This is what joy is. Okay, good. I remember this now. Like,
Yeah.
it
100%.
meant so much to me to be able to save it for that moment when I desperately needed it. It was
I mean,
so important.
that is so kind of you to say. And also it's really the only thing I can hope for right now. I mean, we're recording this a couple of days after the results of the 24 election have come in. And I think everybody who I love and respect and care about is feeling somewhere between complete dissociation,
Yeah.
Yep.
uh, uh, despair, and rage.
Yep.
And I am consistently floating between those three
Totally.
things right
Yeah.
now.
Totally.
100%.
And to hear that though, of
Well, that's
like,
what art is for. Like, not to
Yeah.
sound Pollyanna, but like, I'm an
no,
artist. Like, that's what we do it for. It's like, I do it to keep myself sane and I take in other people's art to keep myself sane. Like, that's the whole point.
you know, Jody, you just touched on something because I've had to like have that caveat of, you know, I hope I don't sound too Pollyanna here because, you know, I have eyeballs. I read the reviews that people say about the movie. And I have the John Waters the John Waters take of like read the good ones twice, the bad ones once, move on, right?
Yeah.
But there's a consistent thing in a lot of the reviews that are like, Sav's naivete, Sav's whatever. And I'm just like, sure, like, sure, there's definitely a lot of things I was naive about going into the process, like the idea that it would be fun, for example, like that making a documentary fun. I'm like, it's actually the most heart-wrenching exercise I could have ever performed on myself. And I'm glad to leave it where it is. But there seems to be this like false idea, especially right now, where everything is labeled like cringe or it's like bad to have hope about things, which is something that I don't subscribe to.
Me either.
But this idea, though, that hoping for the best case scenario is inherently like naive or Pollyanna, whatever you want to call it. I actually don't agree with that at all. I think that's what we should aspire to, is that things can work out for the best, that things don't fall apart, that we can have these conversations that are hard and we can ascertain like real meaning from them in our lives. And so hearing you say that, like, I feel very seen right now, and like it's reached to people that really get what we were trying to do here. Because I think we need hope. God, we need fucking hope.
I know.
We need hope in cinema. We need stories that aren't just about the worst things that have ever happened to us.
I know. Well, and you went to make a documentary about a movie that meant something to you, and you gave us a beautiful queer love story at the end of it. And so, like, what more could I have wanted in that moment, you know? Like, I am a little bit obsessed with your wife. She's hilarious. She said that you purified the hockey stands with your butts.
Let me tell you, living with her is kind of like a 24/7 stand-up routine in some ways, especially if we have company, where either you're going to get roasted or you're going to watch her roast someone else, but like it's all with like pure love. There's not a person who is quicker with a one-liner. Like, she makes me better in every conceivable way. She makes me funnier. The fact that I think she's so fucking funny, and the world seems to agree that she's like, it's like, incredibly charismatic.
Yes.
Like the fact that I'm the person that makes her laugh the most, I'm like, job done. Like, job fucking done. Like, that's all I ever need in terms of like validation again. Like, if everything else went away and I still had her, it'd all be fine. You know what I mean?
I know.
That's really beautiful. I'm a crier, so I mean, I cry every week, but that's beautiful. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, her talents are being wasted in the next room right now, just folding laundry. Like
she was
Bob's
in the
Burgers,
movie.
But yeah, no, exactly. No, you know what's such bullshit about that scene though? Like, she's like, you fold them wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at least I fold them. Like, you know, when you're in a partnership with somebody, she's like, I'm being critiqued for my socks. And I'm like, I know I can't say anything back on camera right now because I'm being held hostage by the camera. But like, I'm the one who makes sure that the socks end up in drawers most of the time. How dare you?
Well, I'm glad that you can put that on the record here.
Yes.
You know,
gotta set the record straight.
I am the victim here. I think that's what.
Oh my goodness.
We've got just a couple of minutes before we'll say goodbye, but I do want to ask, just to kind of button things up, you mentioned Barb and Star. Like, if you had to shout out your top, is this an impossible question? Your like top 5 or 10 movies, what they would be?
Ooh.
So I'm curious if you caught this on the first watch, but our closing image and opening image are very intentional. They are references to a film that is in my top 5 that I think about every single day, and that is The Truman Show.
Fascinating. I just haven't seen that in so long, but it's great.
I accidentally trapped myself in a Truman Show. And so you see in the opening image with like the kid who looks just like me as a kid, watching the TV and being kind of sucked into it, right? And then at the end, I walk out. I walk out. I'm free of that Truman Show in some ways.
Good.
It also, we talked about I Saw the TV Glow not that long ago, and talk about getting sucked into the TV, like a lot more of a horror frame there, but yeah.
This is part of like the I've never seen less movies than the last 2 years have been like putting this out. So I
Yeah.
haven't seen I saw the TV Glow yet, but I've heard like wonderful things about
It's
it.
incredible.
And some people have been very kind, and this is like an A24 movie had a lot of eyeballs on it. They like we'll talk about like I saw the TV Glow, The People's Joker, and Chasing Amy. Like multiple people have like referenced this to me, and some people have written about it. This idea of like these trans coming of age stories through like media and like knowing exist. And so very honored to be in that company in those specific conversations. And I'm just excited to see it.
Yeah.
Cool.
I found the ending very challenging because it doesn't leave as much room for hope as someone like me kind of needs in a film at the moment. But it was incredible. I mean, incredible movie. But I think that's what I meant when I said, like, I didn't realize that I really needed like a queer happy ending right now. And I really did. Yeah. And so I think that was,
That's so fair. I mean, and like, you know, I mean, every filmmaker has their own perspective, and like that's the beautiful thing is like, you know, we watch these films that challenge us, and we watch these films that resonate deeply with us, and sometimes we watch something and we're like, okay, now I know what I don't want to see. There's beauty in all of that. Like not everything is for everyone, but I am very thankful that this movie does seem to be for the two of you, which
most certainly.
So The Truman Show, Barb and Star, Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge, very, very big movie for romantic baby Sav here.
Totally. Same.
And talk about a movie that doesn't necessarily end on a hopeful note, but it's the journey. It's the journey. And Chasing Amy doesn't, in some ways it's a hopeful note, depending on your read of it, but in some ways it's just like devastating. And I view it as both. I'm looking at my Letterboxd now. Like my top 4 on Letterboxd right now is Sunrise, by Murnau, The Truman Show, Sorry to Bother You, and Barb and Star. But like I have a much longer list of like movies that like occupy so much of my brain space.
Right. That's a different question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. Like my list of favorite movies right now, it's like almost like 300 movies. Right now. So like, I'm just trying to like do like a cursory glance real quick on my Letterboxd.
We could just have
like,
you
what are the
back
things
and
that-
you can read your 300 movies list for us on another
my God.
episode.
Have you ever seen Pump Up the Volume?
Jody.
What?
Are you reading my list?
Are we best
I
friends?
love Pump Up the Volume.
Are we best friends? Pump Up the
I
Volume.
feel like after this, we're at least on the track to be.
Yeah.
My
Pump Up
goodness.
the Volume was the movie that made me realize I was bisexual because I've never been more attracted to two people at one time in one scene. Christian
It's a hot
Slater
movie.
and Samantha Mathis. Yeah. We don't need to go there, but oh my God, that movie.
Yeah, I mean, incredible film that is in my top. You know, Christian Slater and Heathers with Winona Ryder is amazing. I think a movie that I think about all the time, in addition to The Truman Show, is Defending Your Life. I
Seen
think
that
about
so
that.
long.
It's so fucking good. It's so fucking good. I have it listed like alpha like by chronologically by year and then alphabetical within the year. So like I'm looking like there's so many I'm sure there's so many movies like missing from the list, but like I love a great musical. I love a film that makes us think about like what it means to be like a human being, what it means to like show up for each other. Clearly. I love films that don't always 100% work. Like, so like Streets of Fire is in like my list. And I'm also like, that's not a perfect movie by anybody's definition, but it does kind of fucking rule.
Wait, I've been trying to get Jody to cover that one.
That's one of the ones you've been trying to get me to
That's one of the
watch?
ones on the list. Yeah. Sav, you can say yes or no now. You could say yes and then never follow up. But would you like to come back and do Streets of Fire with us?
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
No, I mean, look, you need a guy to talk about movies.
Yeah.
I'm your guy. My Cousin Vinny is a perfect movie. I think Grease 2 is better than Grease 1. I'm gonna just say it. I love the cinema of Dolly Parton. Even if like not every movie works. I have Dolly Parton tattoos. This is a Jolene tattoo.
Oh my God, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I have a lot of gaps in like international cinema is like a big like gap for me. But like, you know, but like there's there's tons of movies that we could talk about all day. Rear Window. I remember I was teaching Rear Window at summer camp for 13-year-olds, and they were like, most of them are queer. And
Wow.
it was an interesting camp. They just wanted to play theater games, and I was like, I don't think I'm right for this job. But I remember I showed them like 5 movies, and one of them was Rear Window, and they were like getting out of their seats, and they were like screaming about
That's
the movie.
so cool.
But I remember like they were jumping out of their seats because they were feeling the suspense of this movie from like 1954, and they were
Wow.
all also thirsty after Grace Kelly in a way that I was like, so real.
Yep.
So
Wow.
real.
Wow.
So yeah, I could talk about movies all fucking day. Clearly influenced by a lot of the stuff that came out of the 90s and everything like that. Always happy to talk about new queer cinema. But also like any woman who gives a great performance in a movie, I'm like, yes, let's stand up and clap. Let's fucking
Yeah.
go.
Well, so Andrea and I started this as a Yellow Jackets podcast ages ago.
Hell.
And then, of course, that disappeared. But so once that ended, or temporarily ended, we started going back and forth with our like movies that meant a lot to us and shared with each other because we're about a decade apart. And so we started with Heathers, and which I was making Andrea watch. And then the one that I wanted to mention that I don't know if you've seen, I'm sure you probably have, Legend of Billie Jean.
No, I have not seen this.
Put
Okay.
that on your
would
list.
Fucking love it. If you are a fan of Pump Up the Volume and it's like, you know, weird counterculture cheesiness, you're going to love it. Talk about a performance of a woman. It's like kind of loosely based on Joan of Arc, but it takes place in like, you know, I think it's the California desert. A bunch of teenagers fighting back against the power.
Yeah, you will love that.
Hell
That's when
It's
Jody
so
introduced
good.
to me, and yeah,
It's so good.
like I said, I do want to be respectful of your time. I could talk about this forever. I'm glad we waited until the end and actually did get to talk about Chasing Amy because I think it's really remarkable. Jody and I loved it so much. It couldn't have come to us at a better time. Do you want to let folks know? I'm not going to ask you what's next. I know that's annoying. You want to let folks know where they can find you, what else, where they can keep up, all that good stuff.
Well, I will answer the what's next thing. There are some
know.
things I can't talk about. There's some things I can't talk about because like they're just not ready yet. It's not like, ooh, mystery. It's like I can't commit because there's no money in my bank account yet.
Right.
So until that happens, like it's not real. However, there is a script that I'm gonna make next. It's called Pancake Skank. It is very fun. World of Always Nighttime Fuck Sticks friendship comedy. And so there's a really great cast. There's a really great cast lined up for that. Once I can say something about any of that, I will. But this has been a passion project of mine for years, and I'm really excited to make it. The version that we're going to make is the short film that I wrote in 2018. And some people are like, Sav, why would you do a short? And I'm like, well, shorts are their own medium of things that are like very difficult to do. There's a feature version I'd love to get made. It costs a lot of money. So we're going to make a version that I'm really proud of that I think is going to let all of these performers shine and like, hey, this is what will happen if you give me money for scripted stuff. And so that's the next thing that I'm really stoked on. We're going to shoot that, I think, early next year. So can't wait for that. More fun, more friendship, more everything. And then where you can find me online, I have a website, savrodgers.com. I'm on Instagram at savrodgersfilm. And then if you want to follow Chasing Amy, we're everywhere at ChasingAmyDoc.
Perfect.
Yeah. What a delight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
10 months in the making, or 11 months in the making. You just didn't know it.
So funny. That's so
know.
funny. Nobody has ever wanted to talk to me that badly in my life.
I've been bringing it up for so long.
Yeah.
Full circle though. Full circle though. You put yourself out there. You take the risk. You make yourself a little vulnerable. You never know what'll happen. That's how Chasing Amy happened, and that's how this wonderful episode of this podcast happened.
Well, that was a goddamn delight.
That was so fun. Watching that documentary, it was unsurprising that he was going to be lovely to talk to and also so aligned with so many of the things that we're interested in talking about and thinking about. So that was just very fun.
My only regret is there were no dogs in the background. There was a dog bed, and I was waiting for a pug to walk in.
I know. I wanted to ask.
Riley was in the next room. We didn't get to meet her. But other than that, a perfect episode. A perfect episode.
He was so lovely. And like you said in the intro, I think generous with his time and really just kind of like open to talking about all of it, which is, you all know because you just listened. But I'd just like to reiterate that that's not always the case with interviews. We've been very lucky, but that's because we're picky about our guests.
Exactly. So should we talk about next week?
I think so. This is when we do it.
This is when we do it. So Sav mentioned something in our conversation with him that was very interesting to me because we have talked about doing this film before, and it's kind of been on our list of like, we should probably cover that, and we both wanted to watch it anyway. So you want to tell them what we're doing next week?
We're watching Will and Harper.
Yay! This has been in my queue for a while, so I'm really excited.
Same. And everybody whose tastes I trust have liked it. And yeah, I think we're going to love it. I shouldn't go in with that preconceived idea, but I just think that I'm going to love it.
Yeah.
And I think our listeners are going to love it.
Yeah. It'll be good. I'm excited. So where can they find us?
We're at WatchersPodNJ on Instagram, WatchersPodNJ at Gmail. I'm at AQAndreaQ.
You are. And I am Jody_Mim, JODIE_MIM on Instagram.
We will see you
on the road.
On the road. I was going to say
road
on the
trip.
road. I'm glad.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, I was celebrating.
On the road.
We were both correct.
Yes. I love a road trip.
Road trip.
All right. We'll see you next week.